The feminine urge to just like talk nonstop about heated rivalry is so... As a booktuber, there are some books that everyone expects me to have read before. Fourth Wing, A Court of Thorns and Roses, any Colleen Hoover book, and of course, The Housemaid. Yes, Frida McFadden is one of the top best-selling thriller novelists with over 30 books under her belt and a successful movie adaptation. Needless to say, Frida McFadden is something of a household name. But not in my household. Yeah, I've actually never read a Frida McFadden book before making this video. The biggest reason is just that I don't read a lot of like thrillers. The only mystery/thriller books I've ever read are literally A Good Girl's Guide to Murder and One of Us is Lying. I don't read a lot in that genre, but part of my New Year's resolution is to expand my tastes. I kind of want to branch out so I don't just stay in my little bubble of young adult fiction. And I've seen Frida McFadden books literally everywhere. And when I got the announcement for the movie adaptation, I was like, why don't I just go ahead and read the book and then maybe, perhaps, watch the movie afterwards? So I sat down and I read The Housemaid this past week. And honestly, it left me with a lot of conflicting feelings, but I sat with my thoughts for a little bit, and after collecting all my emotions and thoughts together, I have organized them into this video that you're watching now. So without further ado, hello. Welcome back. It is a new day, a new sleigh, and a new video where I have something to say. And today I will be reviewing The Housemaid. So as a brief summary, The Housemaid follows our main character, Millie, which is short for Wilhelmina. And despite the fact that she says it's an ugly name and she doesn't like it, I find it endearing. Regardless, Millie is a returning citizen. What is a returning citizen, you ask? Well, that is someone who was previously incarcerated and is rejoining society. She was imprisoned for 10 years for a crime that we have yet to uncover. So after she loses her job waiting tables at a bar, she decides to apply for a job as a housemaid for a very wealthy family. This family, the Winchesters, I don't know what their business is. I don't know where that money comes from. All I can tell you is that it's probably not ethical. So the matriarch of the Winchester family, this is Nina, hires Millie to essentially take care of her daughter, help clean the house, and just keep everything running. Her husband Andrew is the CEO of some company, so he's busy all the time, and Nina is doing God knows what. She's supposed to be like a stay-at-home mom, but she is never at home. So she hires Millie to help just around the house. So after she is hired on and she moves into the Winchester house, Millie finds out that Nina can get a little quirky at night. That's putting it lightly. She is crazy year round, all day, every day. She seems to kind of switch back and forth. One minute she'll be nice, friendly, very appreciative of Millie's help, and the next minute she will be berating her, screaming at her, throwing things, and just making a total mess of the house. So the story basically follows Millie as she's trying to survive with this new job, obviously having something of a demon boss, and just getting to know the dynamics of the Winchester family. She starts getting closer with Andrew. They're both in their little pity party where he's like, I don't know who this person is anymore. She's not my wife. Like, she's just so aggressive now. She didn't used to be like this. And then Millie gets to be like, oh yeah, she's a total to me. So they have their own little pity party going on. Things develop from there, we'll say. I won't say anything past that because that would be spoilers, and I'm going to give you a minute to click off this video if you want to read the book for yourself. If you've already read the book, seen the movie, or just don't care, then continue watching. But if you don't want to get spoiled, I suggest clicking off the video now. But with that out of the way, I'm now going to go into my analysis and review where I talk about some of the things that I noticed about the book, what I didn't particularly like, what I did like, because funny enough, I will say, a lot of people recommended me to read The Housemaid thinking that I was going to hate the book. And it was so funny because as I'm going through it, right, and I'm listening to the audiobook, I'm like, why did people think I was going to hate it? Okay, before I get into that, let me talk about the writing first, because that seems to be the chief complaint that I've seen from people on the internet. Specifically, people say that it's very simplistic, which I do have to agree with them. The language is often very straightforward in a way that I would describe as essentially just being the bare bones. There's not a lot of flowery language that is added to the descriptions. For example, when characters are described, it's very just like one-word descriptions. For example, Enzo, the landscaper, is handsome. Andrew is devastatingly handsome. Nina is fat. Millie is beautiful, so on and so forth. Which, don't worry, I will address the Nina descriptions shortly. But other than those straightforward adjectives, there's not a lot added to it that helps fill out those descriptions. There's no extra wording that helps paint the picture other than just beautiful, ugly, fat, handsome, whatever. Like, the only other descriptor I can tell you about Andrew is that he has a cleft chin. Otherwise, like, I don't know what makes him handsome. Enzo is very similar. Like, they focus on how big his arms are and how muscular he is, but otherwise, like, I don't really know what he looks like. And part of that could just be like I'm forgetting and maybe they were more explicit with it and I just wasn't paying attention. That's a possibility. But even with Nina's description, like, they tell us she's fat, which is already very interesting. But there's no like descriptions to give you an idea of like what fat means. The only thing you have to go off of is Nina's dress size, which they say explicitly in the book. Already very weird. But like, dress sizes are extremely subjective, and we're not going to sit here and pretend like they're the same everywhere, or even that a dress size indicates a body shape. There are a million reasons that people have to size up even though they technically don't need to. Like me, I'm fat, and I'm okay with that. I have no problem with that. But people assume that I am fat and tall, which is where you're dead wrong. Anytime I try to buy pants specifically, they will fit everywhere except the leg. I have to constantly either sew them or roll them up because for some reason, the fashion world assumes that short, fat people don't exist. So clothing size is not a good way to paint a picture of a character's body shape or size. There could have been extra descriptions added to that for some reason just were not. Again, the writing is very simplistic, it's very direct, it's very bare bones, and I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. It's just like the writing is meant to be as fast-paced as possible. So we're not necessarily lingering on any character descriptions, any setting descriptions. Everything is just strictly what you need to know in order to get to the next scene, which I don't think is necessarily bad. I think it backfires in this book just because the characters come across as too like stereotypical, like archetypes, as opposed to fully fleshed out three-dimensional characters. The book can also be very over-explainy. The first part of the book, it's broken up into 3 parts. The first part is primarily Millie's perspective, and she often spells out for the reader when something feels off. It's almost like a fourth wall break where suddenly like she'll just be in her first person perspective and then she'll kind of break away and address the reader and be like, something does not feel right. Something is suspicious here. Some of that can go unsaid. Like, there is a way to let the tension get to the reader without having to say it explicitly, and a lot of that is with the environmental storytelling. A good example is when Millie is first brought to the house, Nina shows Millie where her new room is going to be, and it's a creepy little room in the attic. Millie points out that there's one window in this room, and it is painted shut. So in an emergency, she couldn't open it. She also points out that there are scratches by the door as if someone was trying to claw their way out. So stuff like that is already like major red flags and would indicate to anyone that something is off, especially when Millie tells us that the door only locks from the outside. That in and of itself, those details already tell the reader that something isn't right here. So to then have Millie double down and say something's not right here is just overkill, and quite frankly, it doesn't need to be stated a second time. And to have to spell it out indicates a distrust in the reader. To a certain extent, she may think that the reader is not going to understand that this is something that they should pay attention to. As an author, you want to make sure that you're leaving a proper, breadcrumb trail. You want to make sure that your reader is going to remember the details that you want them to remember in order to make the twist at the end more fulfilling. But you have to balance leaving clues and basically spelling it out for them. And in this book, I feel that it does lean a little too heavily into just spelling it out and telling you that something is wrong. So as a reader, I kind of tune out during those portions. Like, I will make my own assumption, and it almost feels like Millie is lagging behind as the narrator. Like, when I was going through the book, and specifically when I got to this scene, I was like, oh yeah, something's wrong. And then the next page, Millie's like, something's wrong here. I'm like, girl, I knew that. It didn't make it enjoyable. And honestly, I would just kind of ignore her internal monologue a lot. I am also not a fan, particularly of the beginning of the book. After Millie is hired as the housemaid for the Winchesters, the chapters are essentially one-shots, basically like small scenes, instances that don't necessarily go together, but are just these little contained moments of time. So in part one, in a good chunk of part one, I'll say like probably the first half, it's just Millie will be assigned a task from Nina. Nina will then completely overreact and say that Millie did it wrong, even though Millie knows she didn't do it wrong. And then they just kind of argue for a little bit before Millie eventually concedes, and then fade to black, we just go to the next day. So at times it felt a little repetitive, and Nina was just so frustratingly annoying that I felt myself getting kind of tired with the repetition of these chapters. And I understand the purpose. The reason that we're getting this over and over is so that we can see that Millie is consistently being essentially abused by Nina. So then you'll understand her feelings towards her and why she makes the decisions that she does later on in the book. And Nina's overbearing presence is always in the household, so that when Nina leaves for the first time, your attention is immediately hooked as the reader. Because now you're thinking like, oh, well, we've established this routine with Millie. What is she gonna do now that Nina's not in the house? Will we see her true colors? Will she behave differently? It poses a lot of questions for you as the reader. So I understand that that is the function of these chapters. However, I still think it is slightly too many chapters. Again, Nina is kind of like a caricature of an overbearing evil boss. So at times it's just so overwhelming because it just happens over and over again. In general, I just wasn't a fan of the chapter lengths. And this is like entirely subjective and biased. Like, this is gonna sound really superficial, but when I read, I obviously take notes, but the way that I do that is that it's usually at the end of chapters. When I finish a chapter, I'll sit down, I'll write whatever plot points or just a brief summary of what happened in the chapter with some of my thoughts and questions, and that's how I read books. These chapters, I was listening to the audiobook, were averaging like 5 to 7 minutes each chapter. So no joke, for like over 60 chapters, I would have to stop every 5 minutes to write down what happened in the chapter and my thoughts with it. So it was so annoying because at some point I was like, I just want to read the damn book. I'm having to stop too frequently because these chapters are too short. Again, this is not like a real critique. This is just me like complaining. I'm not a fan of like extremely short chapters. I prefer if they have a little bit of length. Now moving on to the plot of the book. So as I mentioned earlier, when I first started reading the book, it was pretty okay. Again, the writing style was something that I noticed initially, but otherwise, like, the book was fast paced, so it was keeping my attention for the most part. There was nothing immediately standing out to me that would make me understand why people thought I was gonna hate the book. In general, as I was going through it, I'm like, yeah, it's like pretty simple, straightforward. Like, nothing egregiously bad has happened. Like, there are some books that I've picked up, and I'm sure you know which ones, that I was like immediately off the bat, what the hell am I reading? But this book, I was pretty engaged for the most part. Like, when I first picked it up, like, I wasn't foaming at the mouth like, oh my God, this is my new obsession. But it was entertaining. It wasn't until I got to the end of part one, where the big twist is revealed, that I really started to lose steam with this book. It was then that I understood why people thought I wasn't gonna like it, and you guys were right. Yeah, let me explain. So initially, I tried to predict what I thought the book was gonna be about and what I thought the twist was gonna be. I posted about it on my Threads account, where I essentially guessed that Andrew, the husband, was hiring housemaids and then essentially making them like fight to the death with whoever his current wife was. And if the housemaid won and killed the wife, they would then replace the wife figure, and Andrew would be like all in love with them until he got bored with them and would then hire a new housemaid, and the cycle would just repeat over and over again. That's what I thought. And arguably, I think mine is pretty good too. Like, was it the plot of this book? No. But I think that would still be an interesting plot. I'm willing to give up that book idea for someone. If they want it, go ahead. I don't write thriller. nor would I want to. Nothing against it, I don't think I could do it correctly. So that was my guess. And in the back of my mind, I was already thinking that Andrew was in some way, shape, or form the bad guy. Part of the reason is because, and I'll talk about it later when I go into the characters, but Andrew was just too nice. Like, there was no way he wasn't the villain somehow. So when Andrew, at the end of part 1, is revealed to be a sadistic evil monster, I kind of already guessed that, but I did not guess the way he would be an evil, vindictive monster. Now, I'm going to go into the plot. So, of course, again, I'm just going to warn you that there are spoilers. I'm going to be talking about the plot twist. So if you don't want to know, click off the video now. So, the backstory of Andrew and Nina, and specifically how Nina came up with this plan to hire Millie, absolutely ruined the book for me. I was already willing to suspend my disbelief for a lot of the book's explanations, but it was really when we got into the rationale of her hiring Millie that I couldn't get down with the book. So basically, in part 2 of The Housemaid, you learn that Nina, surprise, is actually a victim of domestic violence. Super fast backstory for her. She had a one-night stand in college, got pregnant, had her daughter Cecilia. To support her daughter, she took a job as a receptionist working in Andrew's company. Andrew saw her, fell in love or whatever, took her out on a date, and then lo and behold, 3 months later, they're getting married. A few months after their wedding, now they are post-honeymoon phase. Nina finds out that Andrew is not a walking green flag as she previously thought. It all comes to a head when one day, Andrew notices that Nina's roots are growing in. She had been dyeing her hair a lighter blonde because she was already blonde, but I think she went like platinum or something along those lines, and her roots were starting to grow in. Andrew notices this and he's like, Nina, that's actually where you f***ed up. Also, can I just say as like a side tangent, obviously I'm not blonde. I have never understood the hullabaloo over roots showing. I don't understand the concept of having to get your roots touched up. My roots don't touch up. It's always very confusing to me when blonde people are arguing over like shades of blonde. And this is true ignorance. Like, I just don't understand because my hair is like literally black. Not literally, it's a very dark brown. The vibe is always that there's a superiority in blonde. Like, if it's slightly brown blonde, it's not as good as like a platinum blonde. I don't know. I don't understand blonde hair. That's all I'm going to say. He locks her in the attic room, which we already know is Millie's current room. The reason it has scratches, the reason that it only locks from the outside is because Andrew was using it as a prison for his wife. So he locks Nina in this room and tells her that the only way she will escape is if she plucks out 100 strands of her own hair from her head with the root still attached. So Nina pulls out the 100 hairs. Andrew counts it and he's like, actually, Nina, this is only 99. You have to do it all over again. So he makes her pluck out another 100 strands of her hair. Mind you, she's locked in this room without any food, and he only left her with 3 mini water bottles. Not nearly enough to survive off of for even a single day. So she's dehydrated and she's like, I just have to pull out this hair. So she gives him 110 strands to make him happy. He lets her out of the room, brings her back to the bedroom, and basically sedates her or gives her something that knocks her out. When she wakes up, she hears the water running and finds out that her daughter, her baby infant daughter, is in the bathtub and is about to drown. She's then accused of trying to take the life of her daughter and herself and is institutionalized. The doctors and Andrew himself then convince Nina that she is literally delusional, that she made up this whole story about being locked up in the attic and she was just literally seeing delusions. So she goes through treatment, convinces herself that she is delusional, comes back home, and everything is normal for a little bit. And then one day, someone leaves the lights on in the bedroom. Andrew's mother comes to visit and she's like, someone left the light on. That's like a wild waste of energy. And Nina knows that she didn't do it, but she takes the blame because Andrew, little piss boy over here, is getting all flustered. And she's like, man, it's really rough watching my husband getting scolded by his mother. I'm just going to take the blame for this. So she takes the blame. And then her and Andrew decide to do exposure therapy. So they take her up to the attic so that she can see that it's not a dungeon and it's just a regular old closet, only to find out that it is a dungeon. He locks her in the room again and is like, this will teach you to not leave the lights on. Mind you, he was the one who did it. She took the blame. And thus begins the next 10 years of Nina's marriage and imprisonment. Basically, Andrew admits that he was the one that orchestrated for Cecilia to be in the bathtub, and the whole reason that he got her institutionalized was to show her that she had no escape, that now they were married and she was going to get punished by him whether she liked it or not, and she had no way of leaving him. Over the next 10 something years, I don't think it's exactly 10, it might be 8. Over the next couple of years of their marriage, Nina has multiple escape attempts. She tries confiding in some of her friends, the other house moms in the neighborhood, but Andrew convinces them all that she's delusional and tells them that if she starts spouting anything about him being abusive, that she's crazy and they need to alert Andrew. So he's thought of everything. He's like this master manipulator. It all comes to a head when Nina hires a landscaper by the name of Enzo. He's Italian. He's pretty cool. And everyone thinks that he does not speak English. So one day, Nina is out in the garden with Enzo, just watching him as he works, and she admits everything to him, and then quickly realizes that Enzo can actually understand what she's saying. So now that Enzo knows of her situation, he is completely on her side, and together, they come up with a plan to help her escape. This plan was essentially she was just going to hop on a flight with Cecilia, take on new identities, and they were just going to run away. This plan is quickly thwarted by Andrew, who finds all the documentation and punishes Nina. So now with this plan having failed, Nina has to come up with a plan B. Enzo's plan B was to kill Andrew, but Nina doesn't want him to do that because she doesn't want him to go to prison for something that they don't need to do. So Nina comes to the conclusion that the only logical next step is to find a replacement wife. This is the reason Nina hired a housemaid. She needed to find someone who was desperate, young and beautiful, and someone that would be attracted to Andrew. Enter Millie, someone who is young, desperate, as we know, because she is a recently returning citizen. She is obviously attractive and she's blonde, which is Andrew's type. Nina comes up with this plan. She hires Millie and she's like, okay, perfect. I just need to be an asshole to Millie so that she'll hate me enough to sleep with my husband. Now, I have many gripes about this explanation. First of all, Nina deciding to trap another woman into a marriage with Andrew is quite frankly the least of my problems. Let's not even discuss the fact that she herself is a victim and has seen the way that this man will literally torture someone without batting an eye and decides that the only escape is to subject another innocent human being to that. I'm not even talking about that right now. First, I want to talk about Enzo, okay? This man, we establish, the reason that he's so sympathetic to Nina is because he had a sister whose name was Antonia in Italy, Sicily, and she was also in an abusive marriage. So heinous, in fact, that her husband, Antonia's husband, threw her down the stairs and she died. And Enzo carried that guilt of, oh my God, I should have done more to save my sister. I should have made him pay. All these things, right? This man was willing to kill Andrew. This was his dedication because he's like, no woman should have to go through this. And yet, at the same time, he decides that he's totally okay with subjecting an innocent woman to Andrew. I find it extremely hard to believe that he would have zero gripes about this situation, none at all. On top of the fact that the way that this situation played out was just a little too coincidental. Millie being the one to apply for this job and eventually get it is too much of a happy accident. I'm not even talking about plausibility. I more so mean, what would Nina have done if it was anyone besides Millie that applied? It's a happy accident because Millie is an ex-convict. Not only that, she was arrested for a violent crime in which she was trying to protect her friend who was about to be assaulted by another guy. She bashed a man's skull in. That was a happy coincidence to have this same person then apply for your housemaid job. So Nina being okay sending Millie into this situation was just because of her background. Had it been anyone else, Nina would have had to be at least somewhat okay with the prospect that she could very well be sending Miss Rachel to live with Andrew. It seems so crazy to me that Nina would be okay sending literally anyone into that home just for the sake of her own freedom. Like, I know desperate people do desperate things, but this just seems downright cruel. It also makes Andrew's character seem wildly contradictory because they establish that Andrew is a master manipulator. He's always 2 steps ahead of Nina. Anytime she's trying to plan some kind of escape, he's already found out about it. And that's why she felt so trapped, because she was like, he's already got it figured out. If I try to escape, he'll either take Cecilia away from me, he'll have me institutionalized, he'll have me arrested. Like, I have no way of escaping. And yet, at the same time, Nina manages to hire a housemaid completely under his nose. How did he have no idea that Millie was interviewing for this job? I'm like, this master manipulator doesn't have a Ring camera. He didn't see Millie enter this house. Not only that, but Nina's explanation to Andrew for why she needed to hire a housemaid is such bullshit. If Andrew was supposedly this smart guy, he would have been able to sniff it out immediately, but he doesn't because of the plot. She springs Millie on him. He comes home from work and finds this random person in his kitchen, and Nina is just like, yeah, I hired a housemaid. Isn't it great? And he's like, yeah, sure. He pulls Nina out of the house and he's like, what the hell are you doing? Do you think that you can get away with this? Like, you put her in your room, Nina. No, this is not gonna fly. Because even Nina tells us that Andrew doesn't let anyone in the house. He doesn't like any weird outside visitors that he doesn't know inside the house. But Nina tells him she needs help around the house. They need someone to take care of Cecilia. They need someone to cook the meals because Nina is just so busy and she's so tired and she can't do it. And I'm sorry, I refuse to believe that, because this is a man that is forcing her, again, with violent means, to be a perfect wife. I find it hard to believe that he will let her get off without being at least somewhat responsible for childcare and cooking meals. I also find it weird that he wouldn't question her and why she wasn't able to take care of Cecilia when she's a stay-at-home mom with no job. No traditional 9-to-5 job. Let me be more specific. There is seemingly nothing that should keep her out of the house so much that she would be unable to care for her child. Again, I'm making all these arguments from Andrew's perspective and what I think he should have argued back with, as again, someone who we've established is a master manipulator. It's especially bullshit because Nina tells Andrew that the reason she put Millie in the attic room is because they couldn't put her in the guest room because when Andrew's parents come to stay, they're gonna need a room to sleep in and they can't send his parents into the attic, so they need to keep that guest room open. Guess who doesn't fucking visit the house at any point throughout the story? Andrew's fucking parents. So I'm like, why would he ever agree to this? Like, it seems so odd because, again, we've established that in this dynamic, Nina is entirely powerless, and yet somehow she manages to expertly back him into a corner and put him in a position where he can't refuse. That's really hard for me to wrap my mind around. That he folded so quickly and didn't really push her on anything. The implication is that the reason that he wasn't super argumentative about it is because he thought Millie was hot. And I'm not gonna disagree, but I don't think that that's a strong enough reason for this master manipulator, super smart guy supposedly, to not question his wife even a little bit, knowing that she had just tried to escape him. The whole problem I have with this explanation is that it requires Andrew to relinquish control, which famously, abusers tend to not do. Not only does he have to agree to let Millie stay in the house, but he is also implicitly agreeing not to punish Nina for the duration of her stay. Because if Millie's in the attic room, he can't use it to punish Nina. And that's his one power move over her. The threat of locking her in that room. Why would he give it up? So that I just really could not wrap my mind around. Not to mention that after Nina is freed, she has successfully put Millie in her place and Nina can now go and run away with her daughter. Enzo calls Nina and he's like, hey, Millie hasn't left the house in 3 days. The attic light is on. I think Andrew is holding her there. And Nina basically tells Enzo that Millie deserves it for sleeping with her husband, as if one, she actually likes said husband and this is anything like a betrayal, and two, as if she didn't set up Millie to do this exact thing. Like, how are you gonna say that Millie deserves it for sleeping with your husband when you arranged for it to happen, when this was something that you wanted to happen? She just did what you wanted, essentially. How does that also then make it okay for you to leave her locked up with a psychopath? The ending of the book is also wildly unsatisfying, and maybe that's just because I don't read enough thriller, but I was expecting more of a bang. Basically, Enzo convinces Nina that she has to go back and check on Millie. When Nina comes back into the house, she notices that it's empty, but that the light in the attic is on. She realizes that the door is locked, and she's like, oh my god, I left Millie and he locked her up in there. So she goes to open the door, and at this point in time, we already know, because we've read from Millie's perspective, that the person in the attic is not Millie, but Andrew. Yes, Andrew did manage to lock Millie in the room. And the reason he locked her in there was because she took his books from the bookshelf and didn't put them back. So as her punishment, he tells her that she has to balance 3 super heavy textbooks on her stomach for 3 hours, mind you. So after she successfully completes this task, Nina, knowing to a certain extent that Millie was going to get locked in this room, hid a bottle of pepper spray in the bucket that they use as a toilet that is hidden in the closet of this room. How Andrew didn't also find this when he was setting up the room with the textbooks, I don't know. So Millie finds the pepper spray. She takes it. So when Andrew opens the door to let her out, she sprays him in the face, takes his phone, and locks him inside. What follows for the next few days as Millie has Andrew locked in this room, she forces him to balance the same textbooks, not on his stomach, but on his nuts. Yeah, Millie told him that he had to crush his balls with those textbooks, and I damn near stood up and clapped. That, I think, was like the most satisfying part of this read. I'm like, that's evil. Do it again. So Millie has essentially been torturing Andrew for like a solid week, and then when Nina shows up and sees that the attic light is on, she thinks it's Millie inside, but we know that it's Andrew. So when she opens the door, I was like on the edge of my seat. I'm like, oh my god, she essentially let out Springtrap. I wonder what's gonna happen. I was genuinely so tense in this moment. But alas, Andrew is just dead. No epic chase scene that I was expecting. No final showdown. He's just gone. This man who was so evil and cunning, someone who arranged for his own wife to be institutionalized multiple times, managed to manipulate an entire town full of people, was taken out by dehydration. In a way, it could be poetic. This high and mighty man was taken out by something so small, but at the same time, I wanted something a little more. That was already a letdown. But then it gets even worse, because the whole reason that we're in this position, the whole reason that Nina came up with this plan, is because she tells us as the reader that she had no other choice. She obviously couldn't escape Andrew, and she couldn't kill him, so having a replacement and having it be Millie was her only option. And for most of the book, Nina has been convincing herself and us that Millie's gonna be fine, that if Millie kills her husband, that's a happy outcome, that it's better for Millie to be the fall guy because she already has a record, and that Millie deserves it somehow, and that Nina can't possibly be the one to take the fall because she has Cecilia, she can't leave her behind, whatever, yada yada yada. And then all of a sudden, at the end, when she finds Andrew's body and she joins up with Millie again, she has a change of heart and decides that she is going to take the fall for Andrew's murder. So all that talk that she had no other choice, that this was her only option, and then she just backs down? Not only do you have this character backing down on their own convictions, but then the problem just gets magically solved. Because guess what? Nina, after telling Millie to run away, Nina calls the police, has them come to her house. They discover Andrew's body, and she's talking to a detective. She's talking to this man knowing that she will probably be arrested, which she tells us explicitly, only to find out that this detective is the dad of Andrew's ex-fiance. Now, this ex-fiance was mentioned in part 1 when Millie and Andrew are on a date. He says that before he married Nina, that he was engaged, but it didn't work out. This woman was named Kathleen. The detective is Kathleen's dad, and he tells Nina that ever since she broke up with Andrew, that she hasn't been the same. She moved away, and she hasn't been on a date, that she's very distrusting of men. And he's like, I always wondered to myself, what happened to Kathleen? Like, what Andrew was like? Why the sudden change in her behavior? And he basically tells Nina that he's going to cover up this murder because he thinks Andrew did something to Kathleen. And he's like, man, such a shame that your husband accidentally locked him in an attic for an entire week. Oh, he was missing teeth? Well, we can just skip that evidence of, you know, him missing 4 of his teeth that he pulled out with pliers. We can just skip that and we'll rule this as a tragic accident. And just like that, Nina is a free woman. This ending requires me not only to suspend my disbelief, which I will argue it's a little bit too much suspension, but it also requires me to blatantly ignore previously established character motivations, which that I simply cannot do. Nina tells us that this is the only way, that she can't go to jail for murder, that she can't leave Cecilia, and then all of a sudden she is suddenly okay with leaving Cecilia and being arrested for a murder she didn't technically commit. Speaking of the characters, let me talk my shit about Enzo for a second, okay? Enzo is a walking stereotype. I'm not even gonna go into the fact that Millie assumes that he's Hispanic and wrongly tries to speak to him in Spanish more than once. That already pissed me off enough. I'm like, you're not funny. The stereotype that an immigrant or someone that doesn't speak English as a first language is hiding their ability to understand and speak English, it's so stereotypical. It's so boring, boo, boo, tomato. And it's just like untrue. It was also wild because Millie was annoyed that Enzo didn't speak English more fluently and said that, okay, well, if he's been working here for 3 years, like, he should know English. Funny enough, like, people that come to the US from other countries that speak other languages are actually not required to speak your language. They're not required to learn English and be able to speak it fluently, as you say, just to make you feel comfortable. But that's like such a stereotype that people associate with immigrants and otherwise people that don't speak English as a first language, that they're just hiding their skills. Funny enough, this may come as a surprise. English is actually an extremely hard language to learn. Not to mention that, like, people can simply not. Yeah, sorry. Like, people can just choose not to. There's also the assumption, at least like Nina assumes, that Enzo is here illegally. And that's her motivation for not letting Enzo kill Andrew, because she's worried that he's going to be deported to Italy. Assuming someone that just so happens to have an accent when they speak English is here illegally, wildly stereotypical as well. And technically he doesn't fall into this category because he's not Latino, but the Latin lover stereotype is so egregious here. These women thirsting over the gardener is like the oldest trick in the book. It's not any less stereotypical just because he's not Hispanic. That actually bothered me so badly when I read the book, and I'm like, I don't see us holding these characters accountable. It takes Millie way too long to understand that Italian and Spanish are in fact not the same language. And you know what? They are similar every now and then. I have a video saved on my phone of an Italian grandmother giving instructions on how to make a cake, and it's so weird because I understand it kind of. Like, if you asked me to repeat her instructions back in Italian, I couldn't do it. But like, I know what she's saying. And that's obviously because they have the same roots. They're both rooted in Latin languages, but they're not the same. So yeah, I don't like Enzo's character, primarily because he's a stereotype, but also I hate that he has a forced romance with Nina. It actually makes me genuinely upset because I just think it cheapens his role in the story, because he is genuinely a lifeline to Nina. He is one of the only people that is actually willing to help her get out of this situation. And when you first find out that his sister was also a victim of DV, it's like, okay, yes, you can understand what is motivating him, but But then when you find out that he was actually in love with her this whole time, it kind of cheapens his motivations. Again, I think this is like a perspective thing, because to me, I couldn't help but think like, okay, were you helping her because you genuinely wanted to and your intentions were purely altruistic, or did you just like her? Like, I'm sorry, a kind man with a savior complex is still a man with a savior complex. Their romance was also developed at breakneck speed. It's so odd because I wasn't even clued into the fact that that's what we were building up to. There's one chapter where Nina goes to Enzo's apartment and she's sitting in his kitchen, and all of a sudden she also breaks the fourth wall. These fourth wall breaks are random and very weird, but she all of a sudden addresses the reader and she's like, if you're thinking that anything romantic is going on, you're wrong. Enzo sees me like a sister. He would never see me in any kind of romantic way. And I was like, girl, I didn't think he was. But now that you're saying this, I have a feeling I'm gonna have to brace for some kind of romance between you two. That chapter was also weird to me because, like, up until this point, her interactions with Enzo were very tense. There was a moment where she was locked in the attic. He saw her. He rushes into the house and he's like, I'm going to break the door down. I'm going to free you. We're going to run. Like, I'll help you, whatever. And it's all very tense and really dramatic. And up until this moment, they've just been talking about her relationship with Andrew and what she's planning to do. And then when she finally goes to his house to kind of like nail down the details, her inner monologue is just being like, it's hard to forget how handsome Enzo is. I'm not going to judge anyone for how they process trauma, but time and place. Yes, Enzo is hot, okay? I get that. That was established in the other 90% of this book. I don't think we need to be reminded of how hot he is when you're literally planning your escape from an abusive husband. It was too obvious that they were hinting at a romance between them. It was too on the nose, too explicit. I didn't like it. But funny enough, the scenes between these characters are never explicit. And that was actually like one of the things that I genuinely appreciated about this book, that anytime the characters were having sex, it was a fade to black. You never saw it happen. I was like, I genuinely was prepared to have explicit scenes in the book. And I was like, oh my God, wait, there's no spice? Okay, we did something right here. Thank you. Because honestly, I don't think I would have liked it if we did have explicit scenes, because I'm just like, we are trying to arrange for this man to be murdered. Can we get back to the point at hand? I wouldn't have liked it, okay? I think Enzo is my least favorite character in this book, again, just because he's portrayed as a walking stereotype, which is pretty consistent with all the characters, but for some reason, like, Enzo is the racial stereotype that we're leaning into, whereas everyone else is just like a dramatic archetype. So yeah, for that reason and that reason alone, I'm already like, no, I'm not interested in this book series. The other characters are like pretty meh, whatever. Again, my biggest beef with Nina is just that like she's okay with throwing another woman to Andrew like a lamb to the slaughter. Her plan doesn't seem very well thought out. If you think about it too hard, it just kind of falls apart, and I don't really like that. The book is also like, and a lot of people pointed this out, but the book is also misogynistic. Like, the tagline of the book should have really been like, yes, he finally picked you, but maybe you shouldn't have wanted to be picked. Because this is truly the battle between these women. Like, Millie is just a pick-me. She keeps saying in her internal monologue that Nina doesn't deserve Andrew, that he could do so much better. And that's where all her delusion comes from, and that's why she is fiending so badly for this man. Millie's primary reason for thinking that Nina doesn't deserve Andrew is because she's fat. Okay, maybe that's not the primary reason, but that's a big reason for Millie. It's like, Nina's an asshole and she's fat. If she was an asshole but beautiful, maybe there was a good reason for Andrew to stay, but being fat is where Millie draws the line. And even in like Nina's internal monologue, she's like, I've really let myself go. And in my mind, I just kept thinking to myself, I'm like, Nina in the movie is played by Amanda Seyfried. Like, I was really curious to see, and I don't know how they handled it in the movie, because Nina being fat is like a really obnoxiously big point in the book. There's one scene in particular where Millie is making Nina breakfast, and she comments that Nina is eating like so much food, like, oh my God, she's like gorging herself, and that like she's eating so much and so fast that it's like spilling on her, and it's like, they're painting this picture to make her seem like literally a fat pig. And I'm just like, oh, we really dislike fat people. That's crazy. Like, the commentary on Nina's weight doesn't need to be so much. I argue it really shouldn't have been a thing at all. Like, it doesn't add anything to the book. I think it would have functioned fine without it. Because again, the root is just like very misogynistic, and it's like, oh yeah, men won't want to stay with you if you don't keep up your appearances. Speaking of which, again, Andrew as a character I feel like is a little too contradictory. When he's first introduced in the book, he's just too nice, so it already tips you off that something's wrong with him. When you find out that he's secretly abusive and he's this like master manipulator, I've said that a lot of times, but like that's essentially what he is. It's also contradictory because he somehow has a lot of control over Nina and none. There are too many instances where she's able to like get one up on him, and it doesn't feel like she should be able to have that power. So Andrew is kind of like, meh. Again, I love the fact that she made him put those textbooks on him. That was perfect. But I think that his death should have been played up just slightly more. As for Millie, I will say that first and foremost, in the audiobook, for some reason, Millie is given like a New York accent, which I don't think Sydney Sweeney does in the movie. But the whole time that I was reading, I was like, you know who should have played Millie in the movie? It should have been Sierra Bravo. Okay, let me explain. She does the accent very well. I've seen clips of her from a different TV show series, and I'm like, I think she could do it. I think she also just encapsulates the quiet but secretly holding back like pent up rage vibe very well. But as for book Millie, I think they should have played up her violent tendencies a little bit more. There's a moment in the book where Millie throws down a plate in frustration and it shatters, and it seems like really out of place for her character because up until this moment, Nina's been giving her a lot of shit and she just kind of takes it, like she doesn't rock the boat or anything. So this is the first moment that she really snaps. It's supposed to help allude and like gear up for the reveal that she was actually in prison for murder. So I think it would have been better if they had played up these violent tendencies, because it would have done better to hint that the reason she went to prison was actually a little bit more violent. Because up until this point, they don't say what she was in prison for. They just said that she was locked away when she was 17 and she served 10 years, which 10 years as a minor, you have to have done something pretty bad. But up until this point, we don't know what it is. So if they had given more instances where Millie is being like physically violent, I think it would have done better to hint that maybe there was something that she was hiding about her past. And if they had kept with the violence streak, I think it would have made more sense for her character, because when she has Andrew locked in the room, at that point, we already know that the reason that Millie was arrested was because she was trying to help her friend who was about to be assaulted by another guy, and she bashed this man's skull in. And Nina says in her dialogue that it was obvious by the photos from the crime scene that she intended to kill that guy. And then you go back to the present and Millie is with Andrew in the room and she tells him to pull his teeth out, and suddenly she's very squeamish, which I don't think is like consistent with her character, because they're already telling us that she's a pretty violent person. She's not above violence, especially when it comes to men that are trying to take advantage of her. I just found it a little like flip-floppy for her to be like, she had that man balance textbooks on his junk for so long that he was bruised. Like, that's already torture. So for her to then be like, okay, well, this form of torture is actually really making me squeamish, I don't think is consistent. Like, she engaged in genuine torture tactics. And then she like breaks down when Andrew actually dies. That doesn't match up for me. Overall, the book was entertaining for the most part. Partly because it's really fast paced, it's really easy to get through, and I can understand why it appeals to a lot of people. This is just like a fast, easy read that I think anyone could really get into and enjoy. I'm not a fan of this writing style, again, because it over-explains a lot, it spoon feeds the reader, and personally, I don't like having things spelled out for me. And of course, the plot and everything just unraveled at the end. After the reveal, it just really lost steam, and I couldn't stop like thinking of reasons why the book doesn't make sense. So yeah, the ending, it didn't do it for me. But the biggest crime about this book is Enzo. The stereotypes surrounding that man, oh my God, free my people. What the hell? So I'm gonna go ahead and give this book a 2 out of 5. It would be a 1, but again, Millie was a real one for those textbooks. So that's the only thing that's ranking this book a little bit higher. I don't have a lot of knowledge about thrillers, but I would say that I don't think I would continue this series, especially because the ending of the book is essentially Millie is now a hitman. Girl, you were trying to avoid going to prison. Why? That epilogue makes it seem like Millie was always okay with like killing women's husbands. And I'm like, okay, yes, slay queen, do it. The actual book part is her being like, no, I can't go back to prison. So why would she then voluntarily put herself at risk for going back to prison? I don't like it. But anyway, that's the end of my review. That was The Housemaid. I'm sure everyone has already read this book already. I'm late to the party. That's usually how it is. Either way, I hope you liked this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you read the book? Did you watch the movie? And let me know about the other Frida McFadden books. I'm sure there are some that are better and worse than The Housemaid. So if you've read any other Frida McFadden books, give me suggestions. Maybe there's ones that are better and that would appeal to me more than The Housemaid. Or otherwise, just let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to follow me on all my social media at Listen to Kristen on TikTok, Instagram, and Goodreads. That's the end of my video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Next week, if all goes according to plan, will be Heated Rivalry. Oh yeah.